Shane Van Gisbergen will join NASCAR full-time in 2024, and it could be with Trackhouse Racing. And John Nemechek might replace Noah Gragson at Legacy Motor Club in 2024. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got a ton of NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed for today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. We're going to go ahead by starting to talk about the Detroit Pistons. As it was announced on Monday, the Detroit Pistons will sponsor Alex Bowman at Michigan. Obviously, Ali will be the main sponsor, but it's really cool to see Detroit Pistons. Of course, we're in Michigan, and of course, we're around the Detroit area. It's really cool to see Detroit Pistons are going to sponsor Alex Bowman. I think his paint scheme looks awesome. It looks really cool, and I'm glad to see Detroit Pistons will sponsor Alex Bowman. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Rocket League. As it was announced yesterday that Rocket League will sponsor Tyler Reddick this weekend at Michigan. From what I understand, Steve Aletta had worked in the gaming sphere around the Rocket League games. And Rocket League, of course, is a really big game, so popular to this day. This paint scheme looks awesome. It's amazing. It's incredible. And I'm excited to see it out on the racetrack this weekend in Michigan. It might be one of the most beautiful paint schemes I've seen so far this year. Obviously, NASCAR's had a partnership before with the game, but nonetheless, really cool to see that NASCAR is partnering up with Rocket League. I think his paint scheme looks really awesome. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're going to go ahead and talk about the number 54 team. As it was officially announced, the number 54 team had the fastest pit stop in NASCAR history with an 8.54 second pit stop. That is incredible speed on pit road. I think that might have been during a green flag pit stop as well, which is super impressive. These pit guys are always under a lot of pressure every single week that they're on pit road. And for them to get under 8.6 seconds is absolutely phenomenal. I think the record having 8.7 seconds set by Kyle Busch's team. Now having 8.5 second pit stop is incredible, and it's absolutely amazing. And congratulations to number 54 team on now officially having that record. That is an incredible and amazing record for them. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Cookout 400. As it was reported by Joe Sturgley, who works at TobyChristie.com, the entire field finished without falling more than 5 laps down this past weekend at Richmond, that being BJ Okada finished 36th. That is the closest the field has finished ever in Cup Series history. That is absolutely impressive and shows how more competitive the Cup Series field has become over the last few years. This next-gen car has brought the field a lot closer together. And this is something I think that's absolutely amazing and incredible to see, that you have a field that is more tight and more competitive on the racetrack. The next-gen car's goal is to make the field a lot more competitive, and I think that's something that's been able to accomplish with it. So congratulations to NASCAR on making a car that is more competitive. Obviously, the racing could be better on the short tracks, but it's nonetheless really awesome and cool to see the field has been a lot more competitive, and I think it's actually helped a lot with the racing as well. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're going to talk about the Belgian Grand Prix and the TV ratings from that race. As it was reported by Adam Stern last night, the ESPN got a 1.17 million viewers for Sunday's F1 race at Spa. That is up 11% from a 1.05 million in 2022. That is a pretty good numbers, all things considered. Obviously, they definitely could be better, but Formula's definitely been a little bit down in general this year compared to 2022. But it's good to see that over 1 million people did tune in to the Belgian Grand Prix. I think a lot of people tuned in because they wanted to see how Max Verstappen was going to do from 6th position. Obviously, racing in Formula 1 has not been that good this year in 2023. So hopefully that can improve in the long-term future so we can get better racing on the track. Nonetheless, so it's good to see at least the ratings are up. It's not insanely good ratings, but at least the ratings are up in some sort of capacity. And glad to see the ratings are up just a little bit. Pretty awesome stuff. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Sage Karam. As it was reported by Joseph Strigley that Sage Karam will drive the 66 for NBM Motorsports this weekend at Michigan. Sage Karam has made quite a few starts so far in the NASCAR Xfinity Series with Alpha Prime Racing, and also had a really successful race this past weekend at Road America in the number 24 for Sam Hunt Racing, and then finishing in the top 5 and had a chance to win the race. Sage Karam thinks a really talented driver, and while I don't think he's going to be able to be very competitive NBM Motorsports, I still think he's going to have a really good chance to bring this car into the field. They're looking for someone to get in, locked in the field, and I think Sage Karam does have a chance to bring him in. So nonetheless, good opportunity for Sage, and hopefully he can make the best of it and have a good run with NBM Motorsports, and hopefully get that team into the show this weekend at Michigan. And now we're going to hedge on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Connor Daly. As it was announced yesterday that Connor Daly will drive the 44 for Alpha Prime Racing next week at the Indy Road Course. Remember, Connor Daly initially was supposed to run the Cup race with the Money Team, but he announced about a couple weeks ago that he will not be running with the Money Team. I think it was announced in Mid-Ohio weekend, if I'm not mistaken, that he will not be running with the Money Team in the Cup race at the Indy Road Course. But it's good to see that Connor Daly, nonetheless, is going to be racing at his home track with Alpha Prime Racing. And the team has shown some good runs this year, but they've also struggled throughout the year as well. Nonetheless, it's really good to see Connor Daly's back in the Xfinity Series. I hope he can have a very successful run and be somewhat of a threat and somewhat of a contender at the Indy Road Course. So the better he can do, the better it's going to be for everybody. So hopefully Connor Daly can have a really good run with Alpha Prime Racing at the Indy Road Course. And now we're going to hedge on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Linus Lundqvist. As it was announced yesterday, the Linus Lundqvist will officially make his IndyCar debut this weekend at the National Street Course for Meyer-Shank Racing in the number 60 car, as Simon Pagenaud has not been medically cleared to race at this current moment. First of all, I want to wish the best to Simon Pagenaud. Obviously, I don't know what exactly has been going on. I don't know why he's not been medically cleared at this point, but I would imagine that he will not be back this year in 2023, Simon Pagenaud. But on the side note, let's talk about Linus Lundqvist. Linus Lundqvist is one of the up-and-coming talents in the lower series. There's been a lot of talk he was going to run this year in IndyCar at some point. A lot of people pointing maybe at Dale Coyne Racing as a potential possibility for next year, him going there. But this is a really good opportunity for Linus. I know that Meyer-Shank Racing has kind of struggled in the 2023 season, but I think this is a good opportunity for him, and hopefully he can make the best of it this weekend. We'll have to wait and see what happens, but nonetheless, glad to see that Linus Lundqvist make his debut, and we're also wishing the best to Simon Pagenaud, and hopefully he can make it back to the racetrack really, really soon and get the race in the not-so-distant future. And now we're going to hedge on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Ross Chastain. As it was announced this morning that Ross Chastain will drive the 10 for Kaulig Racing this weekend at Michigan. Remember, it was initially on the entry list that AJ Allmendinger was going to drive that 10 car. So I'm assuming that AJ is going to be racing in the Indy Road Course in the 10 car. But this will be the first time that Ross Chastain has driven a 10 car for Kaulig Racing. I believe the first time he's driven for Kaulig since 2020. So it's been quite a bit since he's driven this number 10 car. But this is a great opportunity for Ross Chastain. He's been really solid in the Cup Series the last few years, scoring 3 wins in his NASCAR Cup Series career up at this point. And we've seen this car go out and be able to contend for victories as well. I think that Ross Chastain will have a really good chance and a really good opportunity to get the victory with the 10 team. I know they've struggled throughout the year. They've been a little bit down, but they've also times been really, really good with the 10 car. AJ Allmendinger's won 2 races this year in Xfinity, and also you've had Kyle Larson get a win with the team as well at Darlington earlier this year. So nonetheless, it's a great opportunity. I'm looking forward to see Ross Chastain back behind the wheel of the Xfinity Series, and hopefully he can do a really good job at Michigan, because the better he can do, the better it's going to be for everybody. So good to see Ross Chastain in the back of the Xfinity Series. Hopefully he can do a really, really good job this weekend at Michigan. And now we're going to hedge on to the next story of today's episode as we're going to talk about the Richmond TV ratings from this past weekend. As a report by Adam Stern yesterday, that USA got a 1.41 rating and 2.43 million viewers for Sunday's NASCAR race at Richmond. That is down from a 1.54 rating last year. However, it's up from 2.39 million viewers in 2022. That's actually not bad, all things considered. Obviously, USA is not going to get as many viewers as the race on NBC, but still almost 2.5 million people on USA is not that bad, all things considered. And hey, at least if viewership's up, I know the ratings are down a little bit, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me. You would think if more people were watching, you would think that that rating would be up just a little bit more. But overall, that is some pretty good, decent ratings, all things considered, for a race on USA. Obviously, Pocono had some pretty good ratings a few weeks ago, and I thought maybe we would transition over to Richmond, but maybe people tuned out because of race at Richmond. Well, I thought it was a solid race overall. Wasn't the most exciting race overall. Nonetheless, I am glad to see that at least the ratings are up in the viewership numbers, but they're down in the other department. We've got some races coming up. Obviously, they're going to be in Michigan this week, and hopefully the ratings for that can be up. I think that race is going to be really exciting and really, really fun. Nonetheless, those are the Richmond TV ratings from this past weekend. Honestly, they're decent. They're not great. They're not fantastic. They're overall just decent numbers in my opinion, and glad to see at least in some areas the TV ratings are a little bit up, at least in the viewership side, but at least it's disappointing though they're a little bit down in the ratings department, but they're not that bad, all things considered. It's not a win, it's not a loss. I think it's just a little bit of a mixture. And now we're going ahead jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Hailie Deegan and Ryan Vargas. Now, Fox Sports did not catch this in the Truck Series race, but basically, I believe it was Toby Chris who put this back on his Twitter page, and basically Hailie Deegan and Ryan Vargas, there was some contact at Richmond. Hailie Deegan was having a really strong run, and she was running in the top 15 for her standards. That is a pretty solid run. However, there was contact between her and Dee Thompson earlier in the race, and now there's also contact between her and Ryan Vargas. And reason that this tweet was put out to show how incredible save Ryan Vargas ended up having. And it was absolutely a really, really good save. After that tweet went out, though, Hailie Deegan definitely got a lot of criticism. And I think the criticism is definitely a little bit justified. She got off the corner. She was not completely down to the bottom of the racetrack. And she jumped up the corner and got into Ryan. Now, I do want to say one thing. They did have a conversation after the race. And I think Hailie probably apologized to Ryan. And both were on good terms. So there's no negativity toward both of them in this situation. But she had a couple incidents in the race. And I think that for a lot of people are talking about her potential future moving up to Xfinity. And I know that that could happen next year in 2024. But again, you can't be making mistakes like this where you go a little bit and wash up the corner. I think she does have some talent, don't get me wrong. But again, I think that you can't be making mistakes like that if you're going to be looked at someone who has talent. You can't make mistakes like that. Otherwise, you're going to get criticized for situations like that. It is disappointing to see Hailie make mistakes. She normally doesn't make mistakes like this where she wrecks people or gets into people. Usually it's people getting into her, unfortunately. But at least this year, it's been a little more of her getting into people, making mistakes on her own. So hopefully she can clean that up a little bit. She had a good race going. Just clean up some of the mistakes and clean up those incidents so you don't get looked at in a bad light. I hope that she can because I think she does have talent and someone who could progress the ladder in 2024. I know her results really don't show it, but she could progress the ladder in 2024, and you can't make mistakes like this, in my opinion. And now we're going ahead to on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Trackhouse Racing. As there was reported by Adam Stern on Monday that there's an element of NASCAR industry that doesn't love it because this is what Justin Marks said. He says, there's an element of the NASCAR industry that doesn't love it because we're upsetting that traditional model. 2311 is doing the same thing. Obviously, Trackhouse Racing is coming through kind of an unconventional way. They basically bought a lot of stuff from the Chip Ganassi Racing organization, and basically they've come in and kind of upset how NASCAR is doing things. Obviously, Trackhouse Racing, a different name and a different brand overall. I think a lot of teams, I won't disagree with Justin Marks on this. I do think a lot of teams look at a team like Trackhouse Racing and they're probably like, hey, this team's coming in and upsetting and coming after the dominance. And obviously in the last year, they have kind of fallen off in 2023. But last year, look how strong Trackhouse Racing was. They were a championship threat. Chastain finished second overall in the championship and got 2 wins with the team and could have won more races in 2022 as well, if not more for mistakes. Like I said, though, Trackhouse definitely regressed a little bit in 2023. You've got Chastain's only had 1 or 2 top 10s basically in the last 10 races. And you got Daniel Suarez right now is outside of the playoffs and likely going to miss the playoffs unless he wins a race in the next 4 weeks. But Track has been a team I think is really cool success story, and I think 2311 Racing is very similar as well in those success stories. Now, I don't think people are as mad at Denny Hamlin because Denny Hamlin is one of the higher up, is basically one of the bigger drivers in the sport, and I think that's one of the reasons why they're not getting as crucified. Plus, that team's been taking really good initiatives as well. But Trackhouse Racing has changed in the game and changed the things, and I think a lot of teams are starting to fall into the way that Trackhouse Racing is doing things. So it's definitely interesting for sure, the way that they're doing things, but nonetheless, I find it definitely really something to keep an eye on, but things are continuing to change in NASCAR, whether for the better or for the worse, that's to be determined, but Trackhouse Racing is coming in and changing the game on everything, and I think it's absolutely really, really exciting and really cool overall, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Tony Stewart. Now, Tony Stewart was on SiriusXM NASCAR Radio, I believe, yesterday, and he talked about the etiquette of racing, how it's changed since he retired in 2016. Now, he says basically the respect and the etiquette of racing has gone out the window. However, he doesn't blame the drivers completely because of the car. He blames NASCAR a little bit for reacting too much to what a lot of fans have been saying. So Tony Stewart, I think it's interesting that he is basically not blaming the drivers for the change of the etiquette. He basically talked about how the car has basically changed the game as well. Because back when he was racing, the cars were spread out a little bit more and you had to manage your tires. with the tires being so equal nowadays and how everyone gets equal and how equal the cars are nowadays, basically everyone can be a little more aggressive and everyone's take, and no give anymore. And I don't think Tony Stewart is completely wrong now. When you have an equal car and a car that basically, a body on the car that is composite where if you hit the car, you're not going to destroy it. With a Gen 6 car, you hit the car, you're potentially going to destroy that car. But with the composite bodies that the next-gen cars do have, you can beat and bang a lot more. But it has created a lot more beef on the racetrack, which, don't get me wrong, it does create a lot of those really, really awesome and really, really good storylines for the sport overall. But when it comes to this situation, when it comes to the etiquette and stuff, Tony Stewart's not wrong. I think over the last 4 or 5 years, the etiquette in NASCAR has completely changed. Whether that's for the positive or the worse, it's up to you to decide as a fan. But for me, I feel like the etiquette has definitely gotten worse, and I think a lot of it is due to the drivers. But Tony Stewart is not wrong that NASCAR put it in a box like this, making a car with a composite body and making everything so equal. And you have everything so completely equal with everything. You basically have something like this in kind of a byproduct of what ends up happening out on the racetrack. So it's interesting to see how racing has changed. You see this in the NASCAR as well, the Tony Stewart racing. The etiquette there's not a lot of drivers have respect for each other in that respective series as well currently at the moment. So it's definitely interesting to look at for sure. It's really something to think about as well. But Tony Stewart is absolutely right that the etiquette in NASCAR has completely changed. Has it changed for the better? I don't know at this point, but it seems like the etiquette in NASCAR has definitely gotten worse over the last few years. And it's definitely an interesting thing to look at for sure. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're going to talk about the Indy Oval Test. Now, there is an Indy Oval Test that is being planned currently at the moment, and this ties into a later story in this episode when it comes to diffusers on the short tracks. Now, basically, Bob Pockrass reported this. It says that NASCAR will test the removing of the diffuser at the end of the Goodyear tire test on the Indy Oval in a couple weeks, but none of those changes will not get applied for 2024. This confirming there is going to be an Oval Test. Now, why is there going to be a Goodyear tire test at the Indy Oval? Well, a lot of rumors and rumors in the industry have suggested that the Indy Oval is going to be coming back in 2024. Obviously, it's going to be the 30-year anniversary of the Brickyard, which the Brickyard did start in 1994, and a lot of drivers over the last couple of years have been calling for the Oval to come back. Now, I think a lot of fans will agree with me that the road course side of things has not been the greatest in the world. The reason they went to the road course tour, though, is because the Gen 6 car and some of the other generations of cars there had not raced very, very well on the Indy Oval. And I think a few years ago, I think we would have all been saying, yeah, we got no problem racing road course. However, the road course the last couple of years has kind of become a joke with how Turn 1 is and how everyone just doesn't respect each other. Look what happened when Joey Logano basically ran in everybody in a single corner for whatever reason. Went from was sent it 5 or 6 wide in a corner in Turn 1 and caused a pretty big accident, which took Chase out of contention to win the race. I think one of the reasons, and I think a lot of us people will say, is basically one of the reasons why the Indy Oval might come back is a lot of fans want to see how the Indy Oval will work with the next-gen car. Look at Pocono, for example. I think Pocono, since the next-gen came to that track, I think the racing itself has actually gotten better. And Pocono is a very similar track in some essence to the Indianapolis Oval. So a lot of people believe that this test could really bring the Indy Oval back. And it sounds like there's a really good chance and a really strong possibility that next year in 2024, for the 30-year anniversary, that the Indy Oval is coming back. A lot of people say, what about the Indy NASCAR doubleheader? Well, a lot of Romans have suggested that the Indy road course will be gone for at least one of the Indy road course races is going to go away, and Milwaukee is going to return to the IndyCar schedule in 2024. So a lot of things happening with both of those schedules. Obviously, the schedule is going to be coming out either this month at the end or in early September. So we're about a month away at the latest from the schedule likely being announced. There's going to be tests coming up relatively soon, and it's going to be something interesting to watch when it comes to NASCAR. But there's an Indy Oval test not too far away down the road. It'll be something to watch going forward, not too far down the road. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Larson. Now, Kyle Larson has caused a little bit of controversy for another reason, and it's due to a supposed wall ride. Now, Jet NTK kind of talked about this on his YouTube channel and also posted a clip on his Twitter page about Kyle Larson doing a quote-unquote wall ride. Now, a lot of people were criticizing Jeff for basically putting this out. I want to say one thing when it comes to that. He says quote-unquote wall ride. I think he even mentioned that this really wasn't even a wall ride, but I've seen people talking about this. First of all, the reason a lot of people are talking about this is because Kyle Larson had to criticize Ross Chastain for doing a wall ride. But Kyle Larson attempted a wall ride before back in 2021 at Darlington. To me, Kyle Larson was not wall riding. He literally accidentally hit the wall for 1 or 2 seconds and never really continued driving the wall. Difference between what he did and Ross Chastain was Ross Chastain maliciously ran the outside wall. I have no problem with what Ross Chastain did, but he went up on the outside wall and gained a lot of time. Dink has the fastest lap in the history of Martinsville. So that's one of the reasons why a lot of people feel like there's controversy around this. But to me, I don't think NASCAR has already sent the penalty report out. I think it would have come out either today or yesterday. I don't think any penalties are going to come out for this. If Kyle Larson gets penalized for this, I think that would be a little bit BS in my opinion. I think that would overall be really bad and a terrible call on NASCAR's part. We know how inconsistent NASCAR could be. They can penalize drivers for whatever reason at this point, and they can do whatever they want to do. But at this point, I think if Kyle Larson gets penalized for this, I think it's a little bit of BS and a little uncalled for on NASCAR's part. But at this point, I don't think Kyle Larson is going to get penalized for it, get any sort of fines or anything, or any points penalties, because I don't think that was a wall ride. He would just hit the outside wall trying to find a way to get around the corner. Plus, his car was not that good and was terrible throughout the day. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're going to talk about the media rights deal. Now, obviously, one of the biggest things that have been going on this year in 2023 is negotiations for the media rights deal. And with the CW announcement coming for the Xfinity going to CW starting in 2025, that will go through 2031, although there have been a lot of questions about the upcoming Cup media rights deal. According to Adam Stern, NASCAR has not been in a big rush to finish its media rights deal negotiations since it has a season and a half left on its current deals. Talks so far have slowed in price. Now, obviously, one of the biggest reasons why the media rights deal is not done is because the teams are negotiating with NASCAR on this. And a lot of rumors have suggested that Fox and NBC is going to come back on the next TV deal for the Cup Series, but it sounds like there's a lot of talk that Amazon is going to come into play and have a little bit of a package. Now, a lot of people thought that Amazon was going to be picking up the Xfinity Series deal, but obviously that deal is going to be going to the CW. The reason why they got the Xfinity Series deal done a lot quicker, I believe, is so that because they want to get that done. A lot of talk Xfinity may be out as well as a sponsor for NASCAR next year after 2024, maybe having a very similar thing how the Cup Series runs it. We have multiple different brands and multiple different sponsors for the second series. But the big question and reason why it's taking so long as well is because of the charter negotiations. The teams, they want the charters to stick around on a permanent basis. Jim France doesn't want to make them permanent, and they've had having trouble getting that negotiated. The reason that they want it permanent is because of the cost of the charters. From what we understand, the charters right now are costing $30 million, and those numbers could continue to increase. The teams are wanting more money, and it sounds like there's a lot of talk that there is going to be more money potentially coming for the teams in the next TV deal, where they're going to get maybe 40% instead of maybe 20% of the deal, or 10% of the deal they get, or 20%, or 25, I think is what the number they get. That number could increase to 30 or 35% to where it's more of an even split, where the tracks get less, but the drivers get a little bit more of that TV deal. And I think that'd be good for the sport. We could hire better drivers. I think that's one of the reasons why you're seeing more talented guys like Josh Berry taking over rides like the 4-car next year, is because he has a little more talent. He may not bring the most money, but a lot of that is due to the talent side of things. A lot of people feel like that he's bringing in, does have a little bit of, some companies may be working them next year. They've had nothing announced since the deal was officially announced. Nonetheless, when it does come to the media rights deal, I think it's going to be very interesting to follow. I think it's going to be very interesting to watch. It sounds like, though, the media rights deal is not too far down. It sounds like it's going to be a little before the deal's done. My guess, it won't be done until maybe the end of this year, because they want to make sure they have it, everyone prepare for it. But it sounds like that Fox and NBC are going to be coming back in 2023, which overall I don't think that's a bad thing. Just hopefully Fox can improve their coverage. Maybe they go NASCAR Productions, bring it in-house. But to me, it sounds like the media rights deal is going to take a little bit to get done, where they're currently working to try to get the media rights deal done in NASCAR. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Busch. As Kyle Busch has officially announced that Kyle Busch officially has a new sponsor for this weekend in Michigan, and that is Quick Trip. Quick Trip is not Quick Trip with a Q, it's Quick Trip with a K. Now, Quick Trip is a big company up in the northern Midwest, up in the Michigan area, and up in the Wisconsin area as well. It is really cool to see that Kyle Busch does have a new sponsor. This is the first time I believe that Quick Trip has sponsored RCR in the NASCAR Cup Series. Maybe they may, I'm not sure if they have, but I think it's the first time they have sponsored in the NASCAR Cup Series, which adds to some new sponsors that Kyle Busch has had this year in 2023. Netspin, Roll X, which is part of the Netspin group. The Marksman 3s and McLaren Girls have sponsored Kyle Busch as new sponsors this year as well. But Kyle Busch also picked up sponsors like Cheddar's this year and 3Chi and other companies that have worked with them in the past. And BetMGM is another one that has worked with Kyle Busch, and Alsco's working a few races with Kyle Busch this year. One of the reasons why Kyle Busch was let go from Gibbs Racing is because of sponsors. But remember, RCR does things a little bit differently than how Joe Gibbs Racing does things, which is why I think a lot of people have been very critical of Joe Gibbs Racing, because they felt like that a lot of people feel like they didn't try to keep Kyle Busch, basically let Kyle Busch go because of the fact they didn't have any sponsors at the time. They almost did have one with, I think it was Oracle was a company, but they basically got out because they wanted to continue working with Red Bull, and obviously Red Bull is not coming back to NASCAR anytime soon. It sounds like they're completely out of the game, and they're not even going to be working with Shane and Gisbergen when Embrace Health comes in and works there. It is interesting, though, that Kyle Busch continues to have new sponsors and new funding coming for him. I think it is a positive for the sport overall that you do have new sponsors and new funding coming in for the team. It's interesting. It's good to see there's more sponsors coming in for a guy like Kyle Busch, because the more sponsors, I think the better it is going to be for Kyle. I would love to see Kyle Busch Joe eventually does not have one sponsor every week. One sponsor like every single week, but not have like different sponsor every week. I think a lot of us fans want to see eventually a main sponsor. Maybe like 3Chi comes in and sponsors for a majority of races. I think a couple companies sponsor for multiple different races as well. Like Alsco's been sponsored quite a bit, and also other companies have been working as well, like Lenovo sponsor quite a bit. But overall, Kyle Busch, it's good to see that he does have a new sponsor this week. I think it's a positive for the sport overall. Glad to see that Kyle Busch does have a new sponsor. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about driver incentives. Now, on Monday afternoon, there was a report by Adam Stern that came out saying that NASCAR is in talks about investing millions of dollars into a new driver incentive program that would start in 2025 and reward the sport's leading spokespeople for promoting its more. One of the things that's been brought up is a ranking-based system. Now, why is NASCAR in talks of doing this? One of the big reasons is they want the sport to get promoted a lot more from the drivers, and the drivers be a little more outspoken in promoting the sport. Obviously, NASCAR is looking toward the future in 2025, and they want the drivers to be out there a little bit more, very similar to what it used to be back in the 2000s when NASCAR was extremely popular, being with brands, being with companies, being on TV shows like Saturday Night Live, like Jeff Gordon was on, doing things that Dale Jr. was doing. NASCAR wants the sport to grow to a younger audience, and if drivers can be a little more incentive to talk about a sport and basically go to a younger audience, maybe do some Twitch streams and stuff, and doing that kind of stuff, maybe bring a younger demographic in. It's no secret that NASCAR has a much older TV audience than most sports, yet audience is getting older and older, and it's not getting younger. And NASCAR is targeting that key demo, which is, I believe, the 18 or 19 to 48 demographic, which is the demographic that I'm in currently at the moment. They want to get that demographic from 18 to 48 and bring the younger audience in and increase that younger audience, because NASCAR wants to survive long term, and they want a younger fan base staying in the sport for the long-term future. Because like I said, the sport is continuing to get older. I think it's really cool that NASCAR is in talk about doing this and maybe handing out more money to drivers as well, which I think will incentivize drivers, because let's be honest, I think drivers do want to make money, and the more they give in the money, the drivers, I think the more they're going to be incentivized to do it. There's obviously drivers who are going to follow this. I think Chase Elliott may not be one of those drivers, and NASCAR might have to force Chase Elliott to work. I think you're going to have drivers like if Denny Hamlin's around in a few years, I think he will definitely do it. I think Bubba also will absolutely do it. Ryan Blaney's probably going to be able to do it. I think even guys like Kyle Larson and Kyle Busch will do it. And maybe some guys in the lower series to make a move up, maybe like a Matt DiBenedetto at some point perhaps. Maybe others get an opportunity and a shot to make moves there. It's interesting, though. I love the fact that NASCAR is looking at this promotion for the sport and talking about and growing the sport. Look what's been going on with Formula One. Formula One's had a big growth because the drivers have been outgoing and outspoken and talking about Formula One, and they go out and do things to try to grow the sport. And social media game has been on point for Formula One as well. But nonetheless, I think it's really cool to see. I'm glad that NASCAR's in talks and conversations for some driver setups going into 2025 with the next TV deal. It might be more money for the drivers. It might mean that NASCAR can get promoted in a lot better light, in a much better way. Hopefully this ends up happening, because it sounds like there's a really good chance that this could end up happening for 2025. And I think it's really exciting stuff for sure. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Andretti Autosport. Now, we kind of talk about this a little bit on the channel on Monday, but Andretti Autosport has been in some talks and conversations about potentially jumping into NASCAR. Nathan Brown from the Indy Star put out a tweet discussing about the partnership with Gamebridge that Spire Motorsports has, and Mongo Andretti said for the first time that could be a huge way that they could get into NASCAR. Now, obviously, Andretti Autosport, this is not the first time that they've had some talks and conversations about joining NASCAR, as obviously they almost came into NASCAR in 2013 when Dodge almost had a Gen 6 car available to be raced. And originally the lineup was going to be Kurt Busch and potentially Matt Kenseth for 2013 as well, but that deal did not finalize because Dodge backed out and backed away from having a Gen 6 car. That's one of the reasons why Kurt Busch didn't end up running the 2014 Indianapolis 500 with Andretti is because of that main reason alone. When it comes to this move, when it comes to Andretti, I talk about Spire Motorsports. One thing and reason why I mentioned Spire Motorsports is because of Gamebridge. Dan Townis, who is a co-owner of Gamebridge, is now who's owner of the Gamebridge Group and the Group 1000 Group, is a co-owner of Andretti Autosport. And obviously, there's been a lot of conversation that Spire Motorsports is making some big moves, and they have some huge plans going forward. But you think about the significance of the Andretti name. Andretti Autosport, they obviously do want to go to Formula One in 2025, and they've had a very difficult and not a great time trying to get into Formula One, as a lot of teams are not budging to let them in. Obviously, the FIA wants to bring them in, but you have a lot of the teams in Formula One who do not want to budge and let them in. They've been trying to increase the entry price from $200 million to $1 billion, and it's been more difficult for Andretti to get in, despite the fact the Andretti name has more significance than some of those names in the Formula One paddock. But unlike Formula One, where they wouldn't be able to be welcomed with open arms, NASCAR would be really, really welcoming. Now, one thing that would hurt them is the charter system. I've already talked about it, but charters right now are going for about $30 million currently at the moment. So that's why a lot of people do believe that Andretti Autosport could partner up with Spire Motorsports maybe in 2024. Now, obviously, a lot of talk about who could be in the cars. We know that Corey LaJoie is expected to sign a multi-year contract extension, and I think one of the big reasons why we're seeing Corey LaJoie and other drivers signing long-term extensions or potentially going to that team next year is because of that reason alone with Andretti. But another reason why a lot of people do believe that Andretti could be involved in a huge way now is because of Marco Andretti. Marco Andretti actually made his Truck Series debut at Mid-Ohio, and guess for what team he drove for? Spire Motorsports in the number 7 team with Group 1001 sponsorship. Many do believe in the industry that you're going to see Andretti come in not too far down the road, and it sounds like it could be a huge partnership with Spire Motorsports heading into the 2024 season. So we're going to have to wait and see what happens with Andretti. They're getting closer and closer. They've been interested really since January about coming in, and it does sound like there's a really good chance and a great possibility that they're going to come into the sport in a not-so-distant future. I think it's really exciting. I want to see Andretti in NASCAR. I think it'd be really huge for the sport, but I think it will come with a partnership. I don't think they're going to just come in and buy a charter and get their own team. I think they will partner up with Spire Motorsports in the 2024 season or 25. Do they bring other drivers in? I don't think so. I think they'll basically work with drivers like Corey LaJoie and maybe potentially Carson Osbar as well for 2024. Nonetheless, I think it's going to be very interesting to watch and see what happens in regards to this, but it sounds like Trackhouse, it looks like Andretti is going to be coming into play and potentially joining NASCAR in the 2024 season, potentially with Spire Motorsports. I think that's really exciting and really good for the sport, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next major story in today's episode, as we're going to talk about the short track package test at Richmond. Now, over the last couple days, on Monday and Tuesday, there was a really important next-gen test that took place in Richmond, and it was a short track test. Now, what were they testing? Well, they were having a radical test when it comes to the splitter. Basically, it was a lift splitter that basically brought the car off the ground just a little bit and basically would bring a little bit of lift on the front of the car while giving 100 pounds of downforce on the rear of the car. And you can tell by some of the images that were released that there was a lot of clearance below the ground. Now, day number 1, the test happened, and there was a little bit of disappointment from the drivers. Basically, Cristobal was a little bit disappointed. He said that there wasn't and he didn't feel anything much different in day number 1. Noah Gragson, William Byron also echoed those same comments from Christopher Bell as well. But Cristobal does know something I'll get into here just a little bit. Then yesterday, and drivers basically, like I said, didn't feel any different. And NASCAR also said, Eric Jacuzzi said that he was a little bit disappointed as well and thought that we had a Grand Slam from what they had done in the wind tunnel, and it really unfortunately wasn't a Grand Slam that NASCAR thought it was. Then on day number 2, NASCAR did more of a tire test, but they also did remove the diffuser. And from what they understand, the drivers are definitely a lot happier, and they feel like that the tire compound and the lack of the diffuser being there was a huge reason for things feeling a little bit different. Now, I do want to mention one thing before I give them a little bit of my thoughts on this. One thing I do want to mention is that this test was not originally supposed to be at Richmond. This test was originally supposed to be at New Hampshire Motor Speedway after that Cup race. However, the Cup race got postponed to Monday, and the weather was not that great for that Tuesday or Wednesday. So this test got postponed 2 weeks to after the Richmond weekend. So a lot of drivers felt like that this test should have been at a track with higher grips. This is where a lot of the aero complaints have come. But there was a tweet that Denny Hamlin actually put out that I do want to get into here in just a second. But again, NASCAR keeps testing aero among other things for short tracks. I want to say one thing when it comes to aero. Aero is not the main thing that it should be the focus. The speeds and basically the horsepower are the key things. Denny Hamlin put out a tweet yesterday or Monday evening talking about 3 points. The first point he mentions, and one way to fix it, is increasing the horsepower. And that's the main thing, is the horsepower to me. NASCAR can do all these things with the aero changes and all the aero deficiencies to fix the issues with the car. One of the things that will immediately fix a lot of these problems is the horsepower. Right now, the engines that NASCAR has are still 900 horsepower, and they're gutted down to 670. The Genesis car used to have 750 horsepower. Now, the reason NASCAR says that they have it down to 670 horsepower is because of the fact they're trying to track a new manufacturer. Guess what? We're 4 years in the development of this next-gen car, in the second year of the car with the short tracks, and we have had no new manufacturers come into the sport yet. I know there were rumors of Dodge and Honda at one point being in, but those talks completely fell through. So there's been no new manufacturers come into play. So what is holding NASCAR back from pulling the trigger to get the cars higher horsepower? In my personal opinion, we need to increase horsepower 100. Doug Yates said it perfectly back in April. He told the media and all the people saying that we can increase the horsepower up to 750. Now, it might take a little bit of time because they got to get the parts to be able to handle the engines, but they can easily increase it up to 100 horsepower. So what is stopping NASCAR from increasing the horsepower? I just do not get it. At some point, they need to bite the bullet, NASCAR does, and just say, you know what? We're not getting any new manufacturers in. Let's increase the horsepower. Drivers have said it, and fans have said it for a long time, and engineers have said it. Even Doug Yates, higher up at Ford, has said we can increase the horsepower. So what is holding NASCAR back from increasing? I don't get it. We're not getting any new manufacturers. We're not saving a team's costs at this point. Let's go ahead and increase the horsepower. The second point Denny Hamlin brought up in his tweet was the shifting. Now, shifting, I'm not an engineer or anything along those lines, but I do feel like shifting does play some role to extend and maybe some of the issues with the aero and stuff, but they have removed the diffuser for that. Maybe that's something they'll figure out at Indy, is maybe they can find a way to stop the shifting. The third thing he talks about is the tire compounds, and he says different tire compounds. Now, I will give Goodyear some credit. The tires this year have definitely been, they've tried some different tire compounds here. I know they want to be a little more conservative, but they have tried different tire compounds, a little bit less, and there has been multiple grooves that have been converted, meaning multiple groove racing, which has created better racing at tracks like New Hampshire, which is a higher grip track. Though I will say New Hampshire has produced some pretty good racing the last couple of years. Again, when it comes to the next-gen car, the biggest thing for me is I want to see the horsepower increase. If we can get back 750 horsepower, I think the short track racing issues can be fixed very, very quickly. You can't keep just testing aero. You need higher speeds and you need higher horsepower for the shorter ovals. I will say I feel bad for NASCAR to some extent, but at some point they just need to give up with the aero stuff and they need to go ahead and fix and bring some horsepower back. Now, NASCAR did say they do have more testing planned during the offseason, but we're going to be going into year 3. And for this test to kind of flop a little bit, though it did get better in day 2, for it to kind of flop just a little bit is disappointing. Again, any changes that do come to the next-gen car will not come the next year. We still got some short tracks that are coming up not too far down the road to focus on the playoffs. But at this particular point, we just need to add horsepower back to the next-gen car, because I do feel like the racing itself could definitely be a lot better if we could bring horsepower back into the next-gen cars. NASCAR needs to start listening to the fans, and they need to listen so we can get better racing on the racetrack going forward. So hopefully NASCAR listens to the fans and listens to the drivers, and they add horsepower in the next upcoming season in 2024. But it sounds like that's not going to happen. But I feel like we need more horsepower in the next-gen car because the intermediate racing has been great, but the short tracks in the road course 610 have not been as good. Though I will say the road course have been better this year in 2023 compared to 2022. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the final major story of today's episode as we're talking about NASCAR silly season. Now, yesterday I put out a video talking about NASCAR silly season, but there was an article that came out from Jordan Bianchi in regards to NASCAR silly season. And there's a lot of points we know at this point and things we don't know. Let's talk about first begin by talking about everything from the article. First, he talks about Martin Truex Jr. And Martin Truex Jr. could return to Joe Gibbs Racing in 2024. However, it's not completely certain at this point that Martin Truex Jr. is going to return in 2024. If Martin Truex Jr. does return in 2024, I think a lot of people are looking at MTJ to return in 2024 simply because Martin Truex Jr. is having a very good and great year in 2023, winning 3 races up this point. It might be the favorite at this point to win the Cup Series championship and get a second championship in the last few years. Here's the thing, though. A lot of people thought that Martin Truex Jr. could make a decision and basically talk to Joe Gibbs, say, hey, we can hold off on this, and then I could retire at the end of the year. And that could open up potential possibility for a guy like John Hunter Nemechek. Speaking of Joe Gibbs Racing, Denny Hamlin is likely going to be back to Joe Gibbs Racing in 2024. While it's not been officially announced at this point, many in the industry do believe Denny Hamlin, he ain't going anywhere. They're just waiting for something officially announced. Even Joe Gibbs kind of said we're likely going to have Denny for quite a few years now, kind of said in a joking fashion, but it's not very similar to what happened to Kyle Busch last year. I know some people are joking about that on social media, that maybe they could be very similar to Kyle Busch situation, but it's not even close to the Kyle Busch stuff. We're going to see Denny Hamlin likely back at Joe Gibbs Racing. Next, let's talk about Front Row Motorsports. Front Row Motorsports is in a little bit of a pickle right now. We'll get into why in a second. But Front Row has 3 drivers for 2 spots. Those are headed by Michael McDowell, Zane Smith, and Todd Gillen. Now, Todd Gillen has not currently worked on a contract at this point for 2024, but talks have begun a little bit earlier than usual with Front Row Motorsports. So Todd could come back to Front Row, but he might be out. Then you have Zane Smith. Zane Smith told Kansas, or Lee Spencer told the media a couple weeks ago that he wanted to have a deal done by the end of July, and hopefully we'll have a deal announced very, very soon. It might come back to Front Row in 2024. But remember, Zane Smith does have a multi-year contract with Ford and Front Row Motorsports that goes through 2026. Then you have Michael McDowell. Michael McDowell currently, at the moment, a lot of people are talking about him potentially going to the 10 car, and we'll get into why in a second. But Michael McDowell really has not had a deal signed for 2024 and is basically goes on a year-by-year basis. Now, Michael McDowell is having a very good year with Front Row in the 2024-3 season. So a lot of people are looking at him to maybe go to a better ride in 2024. Hence, now we move to the 10 car. Eric Almirola has basically come out not too recently, but basically actually really recently on Sirius and NASCAR Radio, and he says he wants to have a decision done in the next 30 to 60 days. If Eric Almirola does retire at the end of 2023, Michael McDowell is the favorite to take over the number 10 car in 2024. A lot of people look how good Michael McDowell's been with Front Row Motorsports in the 2023 season, and many do believe that Michael McDowell could be driving the 10 car in 2024. Next, let's transition to the Chevy camp and talk about Carson Osbar. Over the last few years, there's been a lot of rumors, and Jordan Bianchi mentioned this, that there's multiple Xfinity Series teams that are offering Carson Osbar a potential possibility to go to the 77 car, basically to the Xfinity. However, Carson Osbar may be jumping all the way from the Truck Series all the way up to the Cup Series in 2024, and might be jumping into the second Spire Motorsports car in 2024. While Carson Osbar's had some maturity issues, I think he's really improved. He's gotten 3 wins this year with Nice Motorsports, and does have some sponsorship funding from Premier Security. He's also driven for Spire Motorsports in the number 77 car in Xfinity. He's had some pretty good success and might have a chance to win this weekend with that team. But Carson Osbar could be driving the number 77 in Cup next year, and title might be moving back to Xfinity, could go to Richmond TV Racing. Now we go over and transition to Kaulig Racing. A lot of people believe that Austin Hill is a current favorite to take over the 31 car in 2024. Austin Hill's been really good this year in the Xfinity Series. Actually, the regular season points leader, has 4 wins this year and is one of the championship favorites currently at the moment. And very recently, after one Pocono a couple weeks ago, we saw Austin Hill get congratulated by Chris Rice and Daniel Hemmer. Now, people do believe that Austin Hill could return to Xfinity as well in 2024 or could go to another organization. We don't know at this point, but Austin Hill may be going Cup Racing. Next, let's go back to Ford and talk about Harrison Burton. Harrison Burton, while we, at the time back in May, we didn't know if he's going to be coming back. It was 50-50. It's very certain at this point that Harrison Burton is going to be returning to the Wood Brothers in 2024. He's got Dex Imaging sponsorship and funding, so he's likely going to be turning to the Wood Brothers. But one of the big points I want to talk about is Shane Van Gisbergen first. Shane Van Gisbergen is going to be joining NASCAR in the 2024 season. The big question is it going to be full-time or part-time in 2024? It sounds like at this point, though, that Shane Van Gisbergen may be joining on a full-time basis in 2024. So speculation has arisen on what team could Shane Van Gisbergen drive for in 2024. Many are pointing to Trackhouse Racing. Trackhouse Racing, a team that Shane Van Gisbergen's already driven for. He drove for them at the Chicago Street Course where he got his first career win. And he could potentially, he's of course going to run the Indy Road Course, but he could drive full-time for a third Trackhouse car in the 2024 season. Some people have brought up maybe Daniel Suarez out, but remember, Daniel Suarez at the beginning of the season signed a multi-year contract extension. I think his contract does go through the end of 2025. So Daniel Suarez ain't going anywhere anytime soon. But they could buy a charter from, let's say, Rickrow Racing, and he could go there. Shane could also go to Xfinity Series or Truck Series next year, but it sounds like there's other teams that could be possibilities. We've heard Kaulig Racing mentioned. We've heard 2311 at points mentioned. Even Stewart Haas Racing has been a team that's been mentioned as well at points for a 10 car. But it sounds like if he's going to go Cup Racing full-time, it could be with Trackhouse Racing. But there's a couple of potential possible teams that he could be candidates with. If he goes Xfinity, I think Junior Motorsports is a possibility. Maybe takes over to 16 because A.J. Allmendinger, it's unconfirmed if he's going to be back next year or not at this point. But he could go to multiple different teams in 2024. But the biggest thing that got me talking and looking at this article is about Legacy Motor Club. Now, Legacy Motor Club is going to be switching to Toyota in 2024. Eric Jones, we know for sure, is going to be back in the number 43 car next year, as confirmed in the article. Now, a lot of people believe that Noah Gragson's also going to be coming over and driving that number 42 car next year with Legacy with Toyota because he was a former Toyota driver. However, according to this article, Noah Gragson might be out of Legacy Motor Club at the end of the 2023 season, and John Hunter Nemechek could be replacing him and taking over the 42 car in 2024, which I think is absolutely shocking. Noah Gragson does have funding and sponsorship. And let me say this to defend Noah Gragson. Has Noah Gragson had a good year in the Cup Series in 2023? No, absolutely not. However, to defend Noah Gragson, the Legacy Motor Club has struggled immensely from 2022 to 2023. Last year at Eric Jones, they would have made the playoffs on points alone, and they won the Southern 500. This year, they only had 4 or 5 top 10s altogether, and all of them come from Eric Jones. And Eric Jones is like 26th or 27th in points. Yes, he has a big points penalty, but Eric Jones would be like 26 or 27 points even without the penalty. He has struggled in 2023. And Noah Gragson is a rookie. If you're expecting Noah Gragson immediately do great, I got news for you. Rookies generally don't perform great. But I have to believe it's not a Legacy Motor Club decision. I think it's a Toyota decision. I feel like Toyota is looking at John Hunter Nemechek. And what I think could end up happening is you have John Hunter Nemechek goes into 42 one year, and then maybe in 2025 goes to Joe Gibbs Racing. But here's what I will say in this. If I was in John Hunter's position, I would stay with Joe Gibbs Racing and Xfinity for one more year, keep Noah in the 42 car next year in 2024, and have John Hunter wait another year for Martin Truex Jr. Now, if Martin retires at the end of this year, if he wins the championship, I think then you have John Hunter going to 19. But there's a good chance John Hunter goes to 42 car. Now, I will say John Hunter deserves the opportunity to go Cup Racing in 2024. He's been really good in Xfinity this year and has done it the right way coming up. Remember, he did go Cup Racing in 2020 and struggled that season. However, when it comes to John Hunter Nemechek, I feel like Noah Gragson, it would be a little bit unjustified to Noah because Noah Gragson, well, yes, he has struggled this year. I just feel like it'd be a little bit harsh to kick Noah Gragson out as a rookie. Legacy Motor Club has struggled immensely this season, and I just don't feel like Noah Gragson deserves to be kicked out of the team. If he is getting kicked out, I don't think it's a legacy decision. I think it's a Toyota decision. I could see Noah going back to Xfinity, though, and driving for Junior Motorsports. There's some rumors about Junior Motorsports behind the scenes that there could be a lot of changes coming with that team. Obviously, Brandon Jones may be leaving that team at the end of the year, go back to Joe Gibbs Racing. There's been rumors about that. For some other rumors about other drivers of the team, we've heard Jeff Earhart's been mentioned for the A-Car next year, and other names have been mentioned as well. But I think at this particular point, you look at Noah Gragson, and you look at what's going on there, I feel like it would be a bad move to get rid of Noah Gragson from Legacy. I think it overall would not be a great move for the team, and it could be a bad move overall from the organization. But it sounds like there's a chance, a possibility, that John Hunter Nemechek might be taking over the 42 car for Legacy Motor Club in 2024. So, that is going to today's NASCAR news and motorsports news video. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please like and subscribe to the channel. Notifications on so if I win a video, it does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Links go below that, and comment your thoughts below on today's episode. What thoughts about all the silly season stuff we talked about on the channel? Do you think Shane Van Gisbergen will join Trackhouse Racing in 2024 or not? And do you think Noah Gragson will be kicked out of Legacy Motor Club for John Hunter Nemechek? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I will not have another video on the channel today. Tomorrow there will be the NASCAR Cup Series race picks for the upcoming race in Michigan, and also the SRX race review from Berlin Raceway. Then on Friday we'll have a NASCAR news video on the channel, and on Saturday we will also have the Xfinity Series race review from Michigan, and then Sunday we'll have the Cup Series race for Michigan as well, pending the weather. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode, and I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.